Welcome to another episode of The Good Stuff with Scott and Dave. I am Dave.
Scott.
And we've got a special guest with us, our resident Columbo expert. Do you want to introduce yourself, good sir?
Well, I've been on several of your other videos, really dealing with Andy Griffith, the Mayberry Memories, so people should check those out. But I'm Dave's brother, Steve.
Awesome. Good to have you here with us. I'd say you're probably, truth be told, probably more of a Columbo expert than an Andy expert. How do you think?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I like them both. I have watched every episode of Columbo. It's been a while, so I had to go back and revisit the archive. But yeah, I love Columbo.
Yeah. I have to admit, I have not watched every episode of Columbo. Have you, Scott?
I believe I've watched every episode at least once, and you and I were talking recently. I just started watching them on IMDb TV, which is part of my Amazon stream. So
Me too.
That's my Sunday afternoon pleasure.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't love that there's commercials on IMDb TV, but I do love that there's free Columbo on it.
That's right.
I have all the seasons on DVD, including the movies that they made in later years.
Once again, it just kind of proves you are our resident Columbo expert here. Not only have you seen them all, you own them all.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, well done. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about Columbo. It debuted in 1971 or 1970, maybe even
71, I believe. I believe it was 1971.
If IMDb is to believe,
There were some pilots. You're right, Scott. The actual show debuted in 71. The actual very first pilot, The Prescription Murder, was a standalone TV movie way back in 68. So I was off there a little bit. And even before that, I guess the character of Columbo debuted years earlier on another just standalone TV episode that was then adapted for Broadway and actually was a stage play where they had Columbo on it back in the early 60s. But that was just the one time. It was a shorter version of what was that first movie, Prescription Murder.
Nice.
And not that I'm a great expert, but I do have access to Wikipedia, which helps us out a lot here. So anyway, Columbo, played by Peter Falk, ran for, I think, 8 seasons starting in 71. Then there was a hiatus, and then it came back. I don't remember the whole why it was canceled and then brought back, other than probably just a lot of people wanting to see it return. Do either of you guys remember anything about that?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly why it fell off, but probably like most TV shows, viewership went down. There was other things cutting into the time on that Sunday night, kind of thing.
It was like those Sunday, it was a set of shows, if I remember right. There was McCloud and McMillan and Wife, Peck Ramsey with Richard Boone. There was a bunch of them that they'd rotate through. So I imagine that was probably the end of the NBC Sunday night mystery movie. And then Columbo coming back on his own later on was separate and apart from that. It looks to me like they had a single season back in 89 or let me see the dates here. Looks like 89, and then at that point they started having specials where just kind of one-off movies.
Well, that's cool. I mean, literally those one-off movies ran till 2003. I mean, that's spanning multiple decades there. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, it's the one-off movies that occurred in the late 80s and 90s that got me into Columbo. I'm not as old as either of the two of you, so I had to go back and watch the others in reruns and then catch up, and luckily they all became available later on. But I didn't see a lot of these when they first came out.
Yeah, I remember seeing them when they first came out a little bit, just because that was the Sunday night thing in my house, right? So the family gather around the TV, and Columbo was always on the list of things to watch. That and Lawrence Welk and Hee Haw. That was
the classics, the trifecta there, Scott. Lawrence Welk, Hee Haw, and Columbo. I love it. Perfect combination. And when Columbo returned in the late 80s and early 90s, at that point, Falk was a huge movie star too. I mean, he was kind of different. I believe in the early 70s, he may have been a known quantity, but he was very much not the movie star that he was later on. And Does anybody want to jump in and lead with a favorite episode of Columbo?
I'll get started. And it's hard to narrow it down to just one. So it's one of my favorites, but it's from season 4 called By Dawn's Early Light. And the villain in the show is played by Patrick McGoohan, who actually was, the killer in like 4 of the episodes. He was a repeating guest. But this was the first one, and basically he stars as a captain or colonel at a military academy for boys. It's about to be converted. Its attendance is down, and there's some people coming in that are looking to change it over to make it have a college, a co-ed college. And he's not excited about that. So he plans the demise of the main guy behind that. And then, of course, throughout the episode, we watch Columbo, bit by bit, dismantle this guy's alibi.
Yeah. So you're right. I see Patrick McGoohan as the murderer in multiple seasons of the show. But you bring up an interesting point, Steve, which is that inverted format that Columbo popularized. I don't know if, quite frankly, I don't know. Popularized is the wrong word, but they did it episode after episode, which was you saw the crime. You saw that all take place before even the introduction of Columbo, right? And then after that first segment with the crime and typically the murderer and the victim, right? Then Columbo would show up, and it was almost like he knew immediately who was actually the perpetrator.
Right. And then you had to watch him be able to figure out how to prove it.
Right.
And so that it was a cat and mouse game with all of these Columbo's episodes, with the people thinking that they're outsmart, and he plays, he kind of plays on that and tries to make sure that they don't take him as seriously as they could. And that they might make a mistake, slip up and make a mistake. But it's always a cat and mouse game. This episode's unique where it all takes place on a military academy. And you may notice, it sounds like you've got IMDb pulled up there maybe. Future movie star Bruno Kirby is also in this episode as one of the young cadets. But it's just a fun episode to watch.
Very cool. So I have to say this. If I ever committed a crime, and Columbo showed up at the scene, I would just pretty much hand out my hands, arrest me, I give. There's no point. That's a cat and mouse game. You're not going to win.
And I love that format that you talked about, kind of the inverted, crime, where instead of not knowing who did it, like Agatha Christie just used to drive me crazy because there was always a spin at the end. But you always knew who did it, and then it was fun to watch him solve it. And similarly, Knives Out, which just came out recently, kind of used that same format in what they did, and I think that's kind of why it's as popular as it has been.
We still haven't seen Knives Out. Recommended? Is that pretty good?
Oh, highly recommended.
Okay.
2 thumbs up.
Yeah, I want to see that as well.
Get to it. Scott, you want to go with your favorite episode of Columbo?
Absolutely. So, Steve, mine, same season. I think it might even have been the episode right before yours. It's called Negative Reaction, and it's with Dick Van Dyke.
Oh.
So you get not only do you get Dick Van Dyke with a beard, right, a snowy white beard, but you get evil Dick Van Dyke. He murders his wife. You're somewhat sympathetic to him because his wife is just really, a piece of work. But in just a few seconds that it takes to set up the murder and for her to die, you kind of get a feeling for how much aggravation she's put him through in just, maybe a couple of minutes worth of dialogue.
Wow.
And then at the very end, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer. He's thought this out to the T, and Columbo at the very end uses photography against him to get to stumble, and he's able to solve it that way.
Okay, so I have to admit, having not seen either of those 2 episodes, I'm going to definitely watch both of them because I love Patrick McGoohan. in The Prisoner, which was a great show from the late 60s, maybe mid 60s, don't know. And then Dick Van Dyke, come on. That's one of the things about Columbo is you look at who the murderers are played by over the years, especially those early seasons. It's just a list of star after star, but Dick Van Dyke playing against type, so that's so perfect.
Well, and you had like Leonard Nimoy and Jim Kirk. Hello.
William
Shatner, right? So you got the Star Trek guys coming in there, and so it was just, and then you get Dick Van Dyke and just these players that you're so used to seeing as A-listers at the time coming in and doing a TV show.
Yeah. I'm looking at like the list of like season 3 here, and you got Johnny Cash. Come on.
Oh yeah.
You've got Jack Cassidy, Robert Holt, Jackie Cooper, Donald Pleasance, and then to your point, season 4, Robert Conrad, Dick Van Dyke, Patrick McGowan, Robert Vaughn, said Robert Cole, but George Hamilton. It's just like they really did a great job of casting the bad guy.
Oh yeah.
For my favorite episode, we're going to go all the way back to season 1, and the 4th episode in the season. So that would have been like the 6th of all episodes since there were 2 pilots, but the 4th episode that season was titled Suitable for Framing, and it starred Ross Martin as a nephew, I believe, who was an art critic who had been disinherited. I don't know if disinherited is the right word, but he was no longer the beneficiary of his uncle's art collection when he would pass. And that was going to go to the uncle's ex-wife, and he was angry about that, decided to kill his uncle, frame the ex-wife, and just, again, same thing you guys are saying, the cat and mouse game that ensues with good old Artie from Wild Wild West, right? Who's playing just this, he just plays such an unlikable character in this episode. So smug and sure of himself, and he thinks he set everything up so perfectly, and he's so condescending to Columbo the whole episode that by the time at the very end when Columbo has just worn him down to the point where he set him up perfectly for the last scene, the big reveal. I watched the ending of that again today just to watch, and the payoff is so good, and Falk and Martin, quite frankly, are so excellent in that episode, and Don Amici's in that episode as well.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of Don Amici, and also Kim Hunter of Planet of the Apes fame. So really good actors in that one as well.
I think that one is credited with being the fastest murder in any of them. I think it occurs within the first minute of the show.
It usually doesn't happen that quick.
No, the guy's playing on the piano, the uncle. You see him playing, you see Ross Martin, if I'm remembering correctly. They're smiling at each other, and then you hear a gunshot, and he's dead. That's it. And that's how cold this guy was, is that he could literally smile at his uncle and then commit the crime. Great episode. Columbo is one of those where, talk about timeless too, right? It really stands the test of time. There's lots of shows you can watch and they seem kind of dated these days, particularly a lot of stuff in the 80s. But not Columbo. You can watch these and they feel just as fresh and good today.
Yeah, it's some things that stand out from the Columbo episode, the whole series. Of course, the iconic trench coat, raincoat, which I think the story goes that Peter Falk was going to audition for the play, and it was actually raining outside, and so he stopped somewhere to buy that on the audition, and that became part of the persona. His part of his uniform, his superhero costume was that trench coat, and then the car, which is a French car, it's a Peugeot. Through the whole, the whole 30-year run of the show, he's still driving that car around. And I think the show was originally based off of a French mystery show. So there's some ties there, but that car is awesome.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So I worked for my uncle in 2 different summers, but one summer in Hermosa Beach, California, He had a jewelry shop right off the Pacific Coast. Well, it was actually on the Pacific Coast Highway. It was like an 8-block walk from me to the beach. And I only worked for him 3 days a week. So the other, days I'm down at the beach literally all day. And one day they were filming down there. And they were there for a long time for what probably proved out to be, just a few minutes of screen time. But when he wasn't in shot, he was talking to anybody that wanted to talk to him. He was the nicest guy. He would come out of, he wasn't in character, but he's wearing the costume and he has the voice and the eye. So, you're just like, it's Peter Falk, it's Columbo, So he was just super cool. And so I just stood there and watched him film, for like 6 hours.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing.
So one final thought, Steve, and maybe this is too soon for us, and sorry to be a downer for anybody who watches this video later. Steve and I, our mother recently passed away from dementia. Whether it was Alzheimer's or an advanced form of dementia, we're not sure, but it was bad. At the end, she didn't even really remember us, but the same thing happened to Peter Falk. I was reading in Wikipedia. He was trying to actually do one last Columbo episode, a movie called Columbo's Last Stand in 2007. As it fell apart, ABC passed on it. And by 2008, his dementia had gotten to the point where he could no longer act. And his lawyer said that by 2009, he couldn't remember that he ever played Columbo and had no idea who the character was.
It's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking to hear.
Yeah, can you believe that? One of the all-time great characters in crime drama. You played it. You brought it to life. There were other actors who did it before him, but he was Columbo, right? He really defined Columbo, and yet in his last moments, he lived a few years after that. I think he passed away in 2013, I want to say, somewhere around there. But anyway, I think what we can all agree is that it is a phenomenal TV show and one worth watching. To your point, Steve, what does he say? Just one more thing.
Oh, yeah. One more thing.
The repeat offenders on Columbo were Patrick McGowan, Steve, 4 episodes. He was the bad guy. Jack Cassidy was the bad guy 3 times. Robert Colt from I Spy and Greatest American Hero fame was the bad guy 3 times. George Hamilton twice. William Shatner twice, and Martin Landau only once, but in that episode he was twin brothers, so he was actually, they committed the murder together, so he was a murderer twice as well.
There you go.
All right, we should probably wrap this thing up. Any final parting thoughts, guys?
It's worth another watch. Go back and watch them.
Absolutely. Scott, we got to do this more often. Steve, anytime you want to join us, you're more than welcome to. But Scott, we need to make this at least a once a month habit. I also want to thank anybody who's watching this later on. Really appreciate, especially if you're willing to just kind of hang out with us and listen to us ramble about our favorite things. Columbo's definitely one of them. That said, I would ask folks to leave their memories, their thoughts, perhaps their favorite episode in the comments section. And just want to ask for a thumbs up, and if you would be so kind as to consider subscribing to the channel. I talk about music, movies, and television on all sorts of different videos. Scott, help me out here.
From the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
That's right. I needed to say that. The good stuff.
The good stuff.
Set you up well on that. Sorry, pal. But most importantly, as always,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, and thanks for letting me join the tube. It was fun this week.